Hi, I am Tony Russo, and you're listening to Funeral Service Insider, the podcast. Conversations worth having about death care and end-of-life care. This episode is going to be run by my friend and colleague Tom Nondorf, editor of American Cemetery and Cremation. So we're going to let him do all of the introduction work right after this message from our friends and sponsors at Homesteaders.
In a business built on trust, consistent financial strength speaks volumes. That's why I'm proud to share that AM Best has once again affirmed Homesteaders' financial strength with an A- excellent rating. Last year was a transformative one for our company, and AM Best affirmation tells us we're on the right track. As a mutual company, owned by our policy owners, we remain laser-focused on delivering dependable value, industry-leading support, and future-ready solutions to funeral professionals nationwide. Homesteaders is stronger than ever by every measure. Our partners rely on us for the long term, and it is critical that we execute at a high level today while aggressively planning for the future. Reach out to your Homesteaders account executive to hear more about how we are leading the profession in investing in tools and services that benefit funeral providers.
Hello, this is Tom Nondorf. I'm the editor of American Cemetery and Cremation magazine, sitting in for Tony Russo on Funeral Service Insider, the podcast. Tui Snider is with us today. Hello, Tui.
Well, hello, Tom. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to be on the show.
It's great. You know, I took over the magazine over 2 years ago, and I'll tell the story. I actually tell it. I should preface by saying the book that is out is called, do you want to tell us the name of the book?
My newest book is called Around the World in 80 Graves, Travel, Tombstones, and Transformation.
And I was lucky enough to be asked to write the foreword for this book, so I can vouch for it, and I vouch for it in print. So it's a great book, and I think anyone who loves cemeteries, what we call tapophiles, is going to love this book. But what I was going to say was that, when I started, I was given a Tui Snider book by my mother when I started editing the magazine. You know, my mom did the thing moms do. Oh, I found some books for you online, and I sent them. She sent me these books, and one was this, and I said, this is really cool. And I contacted Tui to do an interview. We did a story, didn't we, about you?
We did. Oh, yeah, that was the book Understanding Cemetery Symbols that your mama
Understanding
sent
Cemetery
you.
Symbols, which is that's a reference book that anybody should have if you have a cemetery, if you work at one, if you're just interested in them, because that's one you can walk around with people if you're curious. There's a lot of misunderstandings. There's a lot of bad information out there, but this one basically walks you through any symbols you'll run into on headstones, grave markers. It's a great book to have on hand if you're just trying to understand the type of things you see at cemeteries. If you take people on tours, it's a great book to have. But we did an interview, and we talked about her connection, what led her to write that book. And she's written other books since. She ended up writing for us our monthly column, Cemetery Shapes. Tui Snider has become not just a friend of the publication, but a major contributor. Some of our most beautiful covers also were photographed. And I had a sort of silently existing goal in my head to make the magazine kind of a combination of a business-to-business magazine that it has been, but a little bit of National Geographic. And I think you have come a long way towards helping me achieve that goal.
Wow. Yeah. National Geographic is one of my favorite magazines. I mean, I grew up, my family always had a subscription to that, and I grew up just leafing through those as a kid. So I take that as a tremendous compliment. Thank you.
Well, it's true because, you are also a wonderful photographer, and Tui goes around. She has been around the world, I don't want to say basically, but also kind of almost literally. She's been around the world. She's been in some amazing places.
Oh, I have to interrupt you there. I have literally been around the world.
Okay, let's not verbally. She has really been around. She's been to Mauritius. She's been to Egypt. She has been to Ireland. She has been to Romania. And that's sort of the reason, you can correct me if I'm wrong, for the new book, which is, whereas Understanding Cemetery Symbols was a wonderful reference book and information guide. And you have some books that tell stories about specific graves in Texas and places. This book is almost like the backstory. There's some of the things it's a little bit more human, a little bit more personal approach to the stories that you found while you've been searching for stories. Is that correct to say?
Exactly. So, my earlier books are all travel guides. Even the one foray into true crime I did is actually a kind of a travel guide to certain places here in Texas. So, my earlier books all help you plan cemetery trips, visiting interesting headstones and seeing amazing architecture. But Around the World in 80 Graves is really different. It is a travel memoir, it is personal. Instead of telling readers where to go, I take them with me, literally around the world. But the stories I tell are all about how the people, the places, and the burial grounds that I saw around the world and that I continue to see, how those experiences have transformed the way I see life, death, grieving, meaning, legacy, all these things. It's had a tremendous influence on me, and in a way, it's a love letter to the burial grounds of the world, all the artwork they have, and also I kind of envisioned someone handing this book to a friend and going, or a family member, and going, "See, this is why I love visiting historic cemeteries, because there's so much to them."
There is so much to them, and you really highlight a lot of that. I want to get to a few of the specific moments in the book that are really amazing. But let's back up for a second for our listeners and talk about what got you interested in cemeteries in the first place, why you are who you are in terms of the amount of travel and discussion and writing you do, because Tui also takes people on tours. She's got a big tour coming up here in Europe. She also speaks at events about cemeteries. So a general historian, but how did you get involved in this?
Yeah, well, there are a few ways I could answer that. In the book Around the World in 80 Graves, I do give the first chapter is kind of like my origin story, if I were a comic book heroine or something. But I escaped, a long story short, a cemetery when I was a kid. I played in them all the time with my friends and ran around in them, things you really shouldn't do. But it's a good thing I did, because when I was nearly kidnapped as a kid, it was the fact that I had played in the cemetery and was able to run through it that kept the big adults from catching me. So right around then, I really started writing a lot. Growing up, I didn't think I liked history, because to me it was just boring dates. I wanted to know about people and individual lives. And so I'd find myself throughout my life drawn to cemeteries everywhere I went, because they do tell the stories of individuals and their lives. Years later, I connected the dots and realized that is history too. So that's kind of a long-winded way of answering that question for you, Tom.
Well, you bring up, yes, it's very early in the book. You talk about obviously going chronologically, but that is a really frightening story, what happened to you as a kid. And it reminds me of how, I don't know what our age difference is, and you don't have to answer, but for me, being a kid in the 70s, there was a thing about cemeteries, maybe municipal cemeteries, some others, that were a little bit left to seed, They weren't taken care of, but they could be a really fun place to go after school. I told a fairly interesting story in our publication last year, a true story of the cemetery between my school and home that a kid found a leg in just sitting out in the open.
Oh, wow.
So these kind of things that happen, and you had this terrifying experience. People talk about the fear of cemeteries and stuff, but you really had an experience where a kind of a creepy guy put you and some friends in a very scary situation.
Yeah, growing up in the 70s, it was kind of cool in one sense, because you had all this freedom as a kid. I had so much freedom. But on the other side, there were some pretty precarious things we did. We would like running through cemeteries, which we shouldn't have done. But it was nothing for a kid to just walk around by themselves back then. I mean, things have changed.
They have, and a lot in the cemetery, for instance, where the leg was found. I don't know if you've been back to the cemetery where you were almost kidnapped as a little girl, but it's a lot nicer place. It's more cleaned up. There's a lot of that, and there's a lot of interest in that now on the web. People going around and trying to help clean up and restore cemeteries. People are doing this just for fun now, and it's kind of an exciting time.
are. I have a whole chapter called My Cemetery Social Life in the book because there is so much going on in the cemetery. I overheard a relative say, "Oh, poor Tui, all she does is visit cemeteries and write books. She must be so lonely." And I just laughed. I was around the corner. I heard him talking on the phone. I'm like, they have no idea. I have made friends all over Texas and around the world thanks to cemeteries. But as you mentioned, there really is a renaissance right now, is ironic rebirth, in the cemeteries, seeing them as public spaces. This fall, I have so many events going. I think I have like 8 or 9 in cemetery events going on. I had some earlier this year, ones where there was barbecues and square dancing and the demonstrations on how to clean headstones correctly so you don't damage them. I even had wood-fired pizza and peach ice cream at one event I went to, and they were this little guy with a mobile pizza oven was there tossing pizzas right in the, and baking them right there in the burial ground. It was a historic one. So there is just so much going on, and it's great that people are seeing the potential for community involvement and also for supporting wildlife, which I think is another important aspect to burial grounds.
I like to think we're going to hit a time in the next decade or so when you're no longer going to get any comments, sort of backlash comments like, "Oh, you hang out in cemeteries. Oh, that's creepy." Or, "Oh, for me, you write about cemeteries. That's funny. That there's a job of somebody who does that." I think people are going to understand. And the more people who kind of spend time in cemeteries, obviously for the business side of things, you hope that opens people up to considering a cemetery as a resting place still, because there's still a lot of magic in there. And there's still a lot to offer as a place of connection between you and your family once you have moved on, right?
Oh, there really is. And yeah, I know I get the little snide comments every now and then, but here in Texas, there is also this slice of people who have lived here, the ones who haven't just moved to Texas recently, but they have lived here and their kinfolk are from here. You meet people sometimes and they'll say, "I'm a native Texan." And it's interesting because in the smaller, not the big city areas, but the smaller country areas, a lot of the burial grounds still have an annual homecoming or decoration day, as they call it. And they'll have a sign right at the gate saying, annual decoration day, third Saturday in June. And I've been there to some of these events and people still come. They come and they weed the ground. They get together and they share food. And these have been going on since the 1800s here. So I just hope this more of us get can come to see the potential that there is all around us in these burial grounds.
I was fascinated by that. In your book, Around the World in 80 Graves, you talk about Decoration Day in Texas. So it's not a new concept there, hanging out in the cemetery, having a barbecue. It's not really a new concept on the planet, but, somehow it got lost. People are now waking up to the fact that, Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn was a huge tourist attraction back in the day where people came and picnicked and had a good time, despite the heaviness of possibly visiting relatives and something like that. But tell us for folks who don't know exactly what Decoration Day is in Texas.
Well, it's all throughout America. Decoration Day is actually what became Memorial Day. So we still have Memorial Day, which is when people often go to cemeteries, and we think of it as a time to remember servicemen. But in the South, it really was to remember anyone. And May was chosen because that tends to be when more flowers are growing just naturally, because you got to think we didn't always have florists. You could rely on Mother Nature. So that was a good time for that. And a lot of what happened is that these Decoration Day, and then it became Memorial Day, and it was something we did all throughout the United States. It was a time to remember to get together with your family. But when the Great Depression came, people had to leave their farms and the rural areas and move into the big cities. And a lot of times, one side effect of this was they were no longer close enough to pop over to the cemetery and take part in their family cemetery's annual decoration day or Memorial Day or whatever. So these places, it kind of got farmed out, and that's when you started having cemeteries that became businesses. And we don't we think of cemeteries so differently. I mean, rather there aren't just a plot of land that someone donated that everyone felt they could just come and go to. Now we realize that a business owns them and tends to it. But in the old days, up until maybe the 1930s ish, people took responsibility and were tending them themselves. So it's really transformed. I think that maybe the Great Depression is when I really see, when I'm doing research, a big change in families coming and taking care of these spaces, and it really changing. Another thing too that I find interesting is that a long time ago, before we had these cemeteries on the outside of towns, which this is something that developed in the 1800s. They didn't have germ theory, but they had the idea of miasmas. They thought that like sickness was carried on bad smells. So people had been buried in the church yard and in the church floor. Like you go to cathedrals in Europe and you look down at your feet and you see you're walking over all these tombs, and that it was a real pecking order. You wanted to be buried the closer to the altar the better, and all that depended on your social standing. But these churchyards would fill up. If you couldn't be buried in the church, you'd be buried in the churchyard, and there's only so much room. And so they decided in the 1800s, maybe we need to create these burial grounds outside of the cities. It'll be more hygienic. And people were using them like public parks. They were doing all sorts of things, picnics and paintings, and even like shooting for game and carriage rides. It really was a park, like you were mentioning before. But there was just when this happened, there were some people who were skeptical of it in the church. And one thing I read, I read a few like essays and comments where they said, if we move the dead from the churches, yes, it will like smell nicer. Maybe we won't risk the illnesses, but we are going to become removed from the idea of death. Like if you go to church every Sunday and you're aware that they just buried Jim under the floor, death is going to be more omnipresent throughout your life. And there were some people who objected to cemeteries because they said the whole idea of death will become removed from our daily life. And I was thinking about this just a week or two ago and thinking, I think that person was right, because the family no longer washes the body. We have the funeral homes, all that care that went for it and all that was so close and intimate has become kind of farmed out. And I don't know, arguably, I mean, I really think that we have become more removed from it. And I do think we're coming full circle and we are re-engaging.
Hi, Tony Russo here. I just wanted to take a second to tell you about some of the subscription deals we have going on for the end of 2025 so that you can get all of your funeral and cemetery industry knowledge delivered to your door in 2026. We are having a subscription special for both of the print magazines, either AFD, American Funeral Director, or American Cemetery and Cremation, can be purchased for $12 for the year. That is off of the regular $59 for American Funeral Director and $49 for American Cemetery. You also can purchase a subscription to FSI, the weekly newsletter. That is 48 issues for $99, regular price $345 for the year. All of those can be found if you go to kates-boylston.com/holiday or just click the link in the show notes. All right, let's get back to it.
Well, it makes me think of something, and you wrote about it recently because you were out in Colma, California, which is basically a community, if you will, that was set up to house cemeteries that could no longer be in San Francisco. And, so they moved that all out of the city. So, that's the way in which it was removed from people's lives too. Now, you found a lot of beauty and interesting things over there and many cemeteries in Colma. But, people have to kind of go out of their way to get there, versus living in a town where you might, like I did as a kid, walk through a cemetery, buy one on the way to school, or, see one in your town, see one in an old cemetery in a city that's just in the heart of town.
It's good to see those, I think.
Yeah. So it's interesting how it's important not to be too removed from it. But folks, Tui Snider, she's not just someone who has a passing interest in cemeteries, obviously, but it's not just an interest. She's actually a historian. She studies this stuff. And I was fascinated in a story, and we ran this in a publication. So we had a couple excerpts from the book in recent editions of American Cemetery and Cremation. One that fascinated me was where you were researching a gentleman known as Rope Walker, and you found out his origin that was different than what the local historic society thought it was. And rather than sort of change what they thought, they just said you were wrong. And that made me think a lot about, how we deal with history and how some people can become kind of married to their idea or their narrative that they have. The story of this one guy's headstone has become one thing. You happen to find out a different truth, and it became almost a little bit of they had to take you down a notch for suggesting it was otherwise. I found that very interesting.
Yeah, it made me think as well. It's such a great story. This man was a one-legged tightrope walker, not just a tightrope walker, but a one-legged tightrope walker. And he would go from town to town with a selling cast iron stoves. And so to attract attention, he would come to a little town, and in this case, it was Corsicana, Texas. And he strung a rope between the two tallest buildings he could find in town. So, one or two stories, but still, I wouldn't want to fall. And apparently, what he tied his rope to something that was a little bit, the metal broke. And as he was not only just crossing the street, above the street on his tightrope, but he had a cast iron stove on his back, and he's scooting along on that rope, and it breaks. And it didn't kill him immediately. They were able to find out that he was Jewish, but they did not find out his name, which is just so amazing to me too, Tom, because nowadays, if I were traveling and I just keeled over, people could probably figure out who I was. Number one, there's ID, but even if I don't have ID, they could probably take a picture of my face. And there's DNA, there's so many ways to identify someone. Back then, I have a few times I've discovered this or researched this. It doesn't startle me so much anymore, but I love startling audiences with it when I give talks, is that if they couldn't identify you, sometimes they would just fill you full of embalming chemicals and just sit you in the local window. Usually it was the furniture store, because the furniture store would often make caskets too and coffins, and just sit you there and hope that a relative would walk by and recognize you. It's just such a different thing. This is 1884, really. Not that long ago. But since this fella, all they knew him as was his Professor DeHoon, his stage name, and he didn't have any ID, it was really fun to dig into some archives and track it down, and found out who he was. And I was so excited to send that information. He was Joseph Berg, that I discovered was his name. And he just seemed like such a character. I found a newspaper interview with him and from years earlier. And so I sent this into the local newspaper in Corsicana there. And the editor, he was excited about the story. So after it ran, I was about to go to bed that night. I get an email and it just says Rope Walker. And I thought, oh, great. I open it up and it was like this angry, all caps thing telling me how dare I claim to know anything about Rope Walker. They've been trying to figure out who he was for years, and obviously I know nothing. So I just collected my thoughts and I put together a little file of my crime board, with all the dots. I connected all the dots and I showed, I found this, I found this, I found this. And I sent it back to the person, and I just never heard back, which made me sad because I thought, wow, this is great. Before I read it, I thought, oh, a historian is reaching out to me. Won't this be neat? We could be friends or something. We have similar interests. But it really kind of showed me, it's funny, but we can get really possessive about history, and especially something we've invested in. I have stories that are very close to me that I've researched for years, and I feel a sense of ownership over that bit of history. But I think having had this experience, it would keep me from ever reacting the same if someone came along and just told me, no, this is what we found out. And but yeah, that really was interesting.
It sounded like it was, how dare you find this out before we did kind of thing more than anything else. One thing you have ownership of is the Texas space alien grave story, which is also in our publication, an excerpt, but also in the book. And that's an amazing one. And you were one of the first people or only people to get a really good photograph of the original Texas space alien monument, which is really cool. But what I want to talk to you about is things like that. We preach a little bit in the publication about events, holding events or finding things about your cemetery that are interesting. Now, you've been to cemeteries all over the world, obviously. So a cemeterian may come back to me and say, listen, our cemetery we don't have a grave view. We don't have a famous rope walker type grave, I was talking recently to Ashlyn Rickard Werner, who works for Plotbox and has been studying cemetery events and she said, every cemetery has something that they can find, if they do enough research, if they look into it. What are your thoughts on that? If you're talking to cemetery people out there who are like, we don't know if we have any stories.
It is interesting for me. So there are some cemeteries that I went to maybe 10 years ago and I didn't think they were all that interesting. And then when I've gone back to them, things have popped out to me because I continually study this. So my book, Understanding Cemetery Symbols, came out in 2017. Well, I didn't go, I'm done. I know it all. I have learned so much since that book came out. Really, I need to do a second edition or something now. And I find it a never ending topic, but I agree with your friend that there is always something interesting about every cemetery. There's always a story there. And if it's not about the people, I'm sure you're going to find something about the people, but I would look for unusual symbols, styles, architecture. But if you still think, oh no, my cemetery is boring, look at the plants too. Those can tell a story too. Maybe your cemetery is supporting pollinators that you're unaware of, or maybe you have heritage plants. A lot of cemeteries have seeds that they're like living seed banks, and they have plants that you really can't find elsewhere. So I would agree with your friend there. You just need to keep looking and from different angles, and you're going to find something fascinating.
There's a great chapter in your book where you talk about that thinking for a long time, unfortunately, when it comes to grief, is that we kind of run away from it or we don't face it head on. This is a problem that many people have spoken on. But there is the idea that tapophiles aren't into the grief, into the reality of it. They're kind of fetishists who are not into the sensitive side of things. They're just kind of into the headstones and the wacky stories and that. But your book, I think, does a great job of showing that you can be both, very much into the history, but very much into the reality. And you run into some people where you learn some amazing things and have some amazing emotional connection. You have some very human moments out in the field. What do you say to people who maybe have doubted or wondered about, are tapophiles really important, when in the world of cemeteries? Or are they just people who are kind of, out there for the laughs, so to speak?
I suppose anybody can become interested in any topic just for the laughs, and maybe some people start there. Maybe they're not as mature. I think as you mature as a person and you continue visiting cemeteries, I bet they're going to shape you in unexpected ways. And I bet you're going to mature and your outlook is going to change. I really do think it is important perhaps to try and reach out to people who might be cemetery thrill seekers, especially young ones. I know a woman who has really spearheaded the community volunteers to help and reclaim a really overgrown cemetery in Dallas, Oakland in Dallas. And 10 years ago, when I wanted to visit Oakland, everyone told me, no, you don't even go there. And you would go there. It was so overgrown. You couldn't see anything. Today, it's thriving. They do all sorts of festivals there. I'll be there for Dia de los Muertos at the end of this month. And they have like folkloric dancing and taco trucks, and it's amazing. But she shares on her Facebook page a lot different experiences they have, and one of them was they came across one evening when they were working a little late. They came across a group of 6 or 7 teenagers who were dressed in goth outfits who were trying to be all spooky. They had some candles and they tried talking to them and they realized there was just some spooky stuff going on. So she posted about that in Facebook. And maybe so many comments on there from older people saying, oh, that would have been me as a teenager. That would have been me as a teenager. Now, these are the people who are going there now and pruning things and planting things. And they actually have a honey there and they make jam from wild grapes there. So these are the same people who do all that stuff and really have reverence for the burial ground are the same ones who said, I would have been the thrill-seeking teen doing that. So it's been bouncing around in my head lately that we need to, in order to keep this tradition or, rekindle this and keep people interested in caring for the cemeteries, is we kind of need to reach out to the people who maybe aren't as mature about it or are younger or, thrill seekers and see if we can transform some of that energy into learning about cemetery symbols, which is pretty interesting. And it teaches you some really amazing stuff. I would have enjoyed having that opportunity when I was a teenager. So that's the way I think we should approach it.
Yeah, as someone who really talks about moving forward and keeping people interested in what's happening inside the gates, I think you can't do that without attracting younger people, because they don't necessarily have those memories that older people do of being in cemeteries for burials and that kind of thing. So they need to know. They want to know. And if they have any kind of interest, then you got to capitalize on that and find out what's beneath it.
Yes, I think that's true. And I do talk about that in the book, as you mentioned. I did have some experiences that really taught me to think of grief differently. I was tempted to, in the moment, to run from the scenario. And I had a really interesting experience down in Australia in a burial ground where, I ran into the grieving parents of a serial killer's victim. And, it was...
I don't want to spoil that, but I do, folks, if you get a chance, there are a couple of very powerful moments, and that's one in this book. Around the World in 80 Graves is by Tui Snider. I have to ask you something about a character in the book, and this character is someone who is your husband, Larry, and he's along with you. But what is the dynamic there? He's also a tapophile like you, or is he a tapophile enabler who just happens to love you so much he'll go anywhere with you? Because I think it's got to be so important and lucky for you in a way that you found someone who respects and honors your interest in cemeteries, and seems like he's willing to go wherever you want.
He really is. Yeah, he loves to travel as much as I do, but he does have his. He was not. I wouldn't call him a taphophile when I first met him. He wasn't as interested in the headstones as much as I was, but he came from his own version of the Addams family. I would say his mom wanted him to become a mortician. And when he was a teenager, he actually he loved, I think, Boris Karloff or something like that. Anyway, he made a coffin for himself and actually slept in a coffin for several years as a teenager. So there's funny pictures of every single member of his family taking their turns in the coffin. So he's got that side to him. But I got him interested in historic cemeteries by pointing out what hands mean, because hands are so easily identifiable. Sometimes when I tell people I'm into cemetery symbols, they think they're going to be really obscure and hard to identify. And I'm like, well, you got a hand, right? You can identify what a hand looks like. And so it's a good entry point. And in fact, I reward people when they sign up for my newsletter. I give them a little 8-page booklet, introducing you to all the different things that hands can mean. And so now he is really good and knows a lot of the symbols too. And also he's great at identifying what different materials are, how things are made. He's been a carpenter and a builder his whole life. So his perspective really enhances mine. He sees cemeteries in a different way, and he will point out things that I wouldn't notice and how things were built and made. And I'm like, oh, so it really enriches things. And he loves a good adventure. So he's game. I'm really lucky that he goes everywhere with me.
It's a match made in heaven. Now, let's tell folks, how can they get your book Around the World in 80 Graves and any of your other books, such as Understanding Cemetery Symbols, which to me is a extremely necessary book, I think, for anyone interested in this stuff. And don't wait till she does the second edition. Get the one that's out. But tell us how they get the books, how they can get your newsletter. This is your time. We'll also put it in the show notes, so anyone listening can also check the show notes and find out these things.
Well, all of my books that are currently in print are on Amazon, so you can just type Tui Snider into Amazon. But if you want to connect and you want to see where I am in the world and the cemetery symbols I'm learning about, I do have a newsletter that comes out twice a month, and I love meeting people through it. I've met people all over the world through it. So I would love to meet you if you have any questions about cemeteries or cemetery symbols, historic cemeteries. Go to tuisnider.com. It's pretty easy. You can start there and dig in as deep as you like. And I look forward to connecting with you.
That's tuisnider.com. Tui's work is also available one other place, and that's every month in American Cemetery and Cremation magazine by Kates-Boylston. And we've really enjoyed and gotten a lot of value out of having her in our pages.
In a business built on trust, consistent financial strength speaks volumes. That's why I'm proud to share that AM Best has once again affirmed Homesteaders' financial strength with an A- excellent rating. Last year was a transformative one for our company, and AM Best affirmation tells us we're on the right track. As a mutual company owned by our policy owners, we remain laser focused on delivering dependable value, industry-leading support, and future-ready solutions to funeral professionals nationwide. Homesteaders is stronger than ever by every measure. Our partners rely on us for the long term, and it is critical that we execute at a high level today while aggressively planning for the future. Reach out to your Homesteaders account executive to hear more about how we are leading the profession in investing in tools and services that benefit funeral providers.
Funeral Service Insider, the podcast, is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written by Tom Nondorf and edited by me, Tony Russo. Please send us anything you have to say about this show by clicking on the link in the show notes. And of course, you can also find all the stuff you need to find out about Tui Snider, which is a ton of stuff. But that will do us for this time, and we will catch you next time on Funeral Service Insider, the podcast.